Welcome back to The Overlook. I'm your host, Dominique Hoffman, and today I just want to have a conversation about how we as conservative Christians should steward our voices in the political arena. And today I'm going to be talking about Megyn Kelly, and I really want to preface this by saying I have been a fan of Megyn Kelly for years and years and years and years. I used to watch her on Fox News. I've always looked up to her, and she's been a source of inspiration for me. And I think there's been a bit of scapegoating happening, and I've heard it from Megyn herself. And I don't know if her defensiveness is just fatigue over the conversation, but kind of a visceral reaction to being critiqued by those on the right for her lack of calling out very extreme and problematic ideas that are moving mainstream on the right. And I think the reason a lot of people have looked to Megyn Kelly and also to Charlie Kirk before his assassination was because they were these sound, reasonable voices in the conservative media space. Candace Owens, she's a grifter. She's grifted on quite a few different topics. If you listen to a single podcast that she's made, you can tell that she's paranoid, likely emotionally and mentally unstable, and fixates on fringe journalistic kind of endeavors such as is Brigitte Macron a man or a woman? Why that matters, really, I don't understand. And there's a growing contrarian narrative on the right that seeks to create grievances and peddle grievance-based politics, which is exactly what the left has done for more than a decade. And so we're going to look at an interview Megyn Kelly did. We're going to look at the conversation her and Charlie Kirk had before he passed. And my goal in looking at these things is not to critique Megyn Kelly. No one can demand that she speak out against it. But I think that there is this kind of don't tread on me mindset and this reaction to what was cancel culture from 2020, and this idea that you're not going to police my language and I can say whatever I want to say. And in the case of Megyn Kelly or Charlie Kirk, these are our friends. Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, respectively, were their friends. And I think there's a difference between having friends and then also having friends or colleagues in the space that you disagree with and being able to disagree with their very dangerous ideas and not the person themselves. And I think a trend we're going to see in the clips that we look at of Megyn Kelly and of Charlie Kirk is this idea of, well, we want to have all voices in this space, and we're not like the left. We don't want to have groupthink. So I'm going to invite different people's perspectives into debate and let the best idea win. And I am of that mindset as well. However, when you have Tucker Carlson, who's become an apologist for anti-Western authoritarian regimes such as Iran, claiming that we would lose a war with Russia, which is absolutely ludicrous, becoming a sympathizer of Sharia law. And there's plenty of clips of that. I can link that in the description box down below. That's not what this episode is about, but their words and their drastic shift on many policy positions towards an anti-Western worldview is very evident. And the fact that Megyn Kelly or Charlie Kirk before he passed were hesitant or unwilling, or maybe even to the point of doubling down on inviting, Tucker to TPUSA Summit or inviting Tucker onto Megyn Kelly's show or her tour, is their way of kind of giving a middle finger to people telling them what they can or cannot say. And so I do think that there are people on the right who are fatigued from the cancel culture of the left who are reacting in okay, you're going to tell me what I need to say or what I can't say. Well, I'm going to double down and I'm going to invite Tucker onto the show, and I'm going to invite Candace Owens on, and I'm going to show you. And I think this is a very short-sighted reaction on the part of Megyn Kelly and what was also Charlie Kirk's position, because what it does is it just legitimizes revisionist history, anti-Western rhetoric, grievance-based politics, which grows into identity politics, us versus them, white American Christian versus the Jew. And that is essentially a mirror of what the left has done for the last few decades, which are tactics or, grievance-based politics are things that Megyn Kelly herself has spoken out against repeatedly. And I think the strength of the Conservative Party in this moment is we're at a fork in the road, and we can either rebuke the radical ideas that some within our party have and steer the rest of the party towards common sense politics and towards looking at the amazing things that the Trump administration has done, or we can fall into grievance-based politics, which is going to divide the party in the next election. And I think Megyn Kelly maybe is not of the same mind. So we're going to look at a recent podcast that she did. Okay, so recently on a podcast with the Fifth Column, who are a regular guest of her own show, they kind of asked her to address pressure for Megyn to speak out against Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and just her influence over the conservative party. And I think what she had to say was incredibly interesting, and it echoes, like I said, what she had said when Charlie Kirk was on her podcast, and we'll revisit that clip as well.
To move the party and move MAGA and expel people and accept people, that's kind of a new position for you, isn't it?
Don't have that power. That is not within my capabilities, nor do I want it to be in my power. I mean, obviously we're talking about the pressure on me right now to like denounce Candace Owens or denounce Tucker, which I've said.
I did that on your show, by the way.
Yeah, right.
That's my role.
Well,
Megyn.
this is part of the point I was going to make. So there's a lot of pressure on me to do that, and I'm not going to do that. And I've been
very clear about that on Twitter.
Yeah, I've been having Twitter wars, X wars. I've said it on my show, and people are very angry with me for not doing that. And
that's people within your own camp, by the way. There's a lot of people that I know that are friends of yours that have been pretty rough.
Well, they're very frustrated with some of the coverage that they're seeing from those two, and they think I have the power to like chastise them out of this coverage. And I don't think I have that power, nor would I exercise it if I did. I'm not interested in doing that. I am not godmother to the Republican Party. I'm not anybody's mommy. I'm responsible for what I say and only what I say. And my approach to covering the news and covering Republican politics and all the wars that we're discussing is generally to get as wide of a diverse viewpoint, group of viewpoints on my show as I can. You mentioned the tour. We're having Tucker Carlson on the tour, and we're having Ben Shapiro, I think, the next night. Or it's reverse, like literally within a couple nights of each other.
I think you have them the same night in a cage.
If there's anybody in the nation who could get those two guys to come on together, it is me.
Yeah.
I submit humbly. I really do think I could make that happen.
Sure. And your relationship with Ben Shapiro has not.
No, I love Ben.
You guys
we're really tight, and he's been so respectful. He was on a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And we talked about my very mild criticisms of Israel. I mean, truly, like, I'm not an Israeli critic. I don't know why people are treating me like I am. It's because I won't denounce these other two. I've had.
So I think there's a few things here. One, she's kind of echoing what her and Charlie talked about, which is this idea of I want to have a bunch of diverse viewpoints on my podcast, and it's going to be this open arena for ideas. May the best idea win. And I agree with that. If she had people on her podcast to debate Israel's strategic war front in Gaza, or to debate foreign policy positions of any substance that were not conspiracy theories about how they hate the Jews or about how AIPAC, rules the United States, like she did when she had Marjorie Taylor Greene on her podcast, then I would say, yeah, that's a fair point. But when you have people coming on who have a very, very obvious anti-Israel, anti-Jewish bent, and nothing of substantive criticism on actual policy positions, but just call the war in Gaza a genocide, and AIPAC like the evil overlords of American politics. And my critique of Megyn Kelly at the time was she doesn't push back against Marjorie Taylor Greene. She didn't say, well, actually, fair registration is much more difficult to monitor because you're dealing with sovereign nations and their lobbying efforts in the United States. And AIPAC is a 501c3 registered nonprofit. They're a super PAC. And so there's actually a lot more monitoring mechanisms for AIPAC than there are for foreign agents lobbying the United States. She didn't come with any facts. She didn't push back against the narrative Marjorie Taylor Greene was peddling, which was a very anti-Israel narrative. And so there are many people, such as myself, who are saying, okay, if you're going to have Marjorie Taylor Greene on, then push back against her like you would a leftist who's saying that, a sex change for an 11-year-old is a perfectly valid procedure and not harmful to the child. Because Megyn Kelly herself, she has a law background. She has come out fiercely against the, LGBTQ plus transgender movement. She's become, a fierce ally for girls and not allowing boys or men in women's sports. And so with that same level of preparedness in interviews or for critiquing bad ideas, I would have appreciated if she could have done that also with Marjorie Taylor Greene. And same thing with Tucker Carlson. If Tucker is a friend, have him on the show and debate his anti-Western ideas. I think the tricky thing with Tucker Carlson is he kind of dances around it. He doesn't say things overtly, but he has said we would lose a war with Russia. Okay, so have Tucker Carlson on your show and say, what's your evidence of that? What's your evidence that, Sharia-based societies abroad are a better alternative to Detroit, New York City, which are also claims that Tucker Carlson has made? So great. If Megyn Kelly doesn't want to disavow or to cancel her friends, doesn't want to, use the same tactics as the left, that's one thing. But then play fair and don't just go hard at people on the left with radical ideas. Challenge those ideas within your own party and with your own friends. And she just said, I challenge, have Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson debate. I think Tucker has actually extended that offer, and Ben has, and Tucker Carlson has refused because he knows his ideas don't hold a yardstick to the facts and to Ben Shapiro's ability to debate those facts, because Tucker is largely an emotional commentator. He's created a grievance-based politics on the right that's very similar to the left. So I push back against that idea. And I also think too, much is given, much is expected. She has a huge platform with millions of people who follow her and millions of people who look to her because she is the common sense voice. So, if I had a platform that large, I would want to steward that in order to steer the party in the right direction, the direction of truth, or at least the direction of critical thinking, not of conspiracy theories, anti-Western ideology that's sympathetic to Islamism and even some neo-Marxist narratives.
Some mild pushback. I'm at the point, like a lot of Americans, where I just feel like it's gone on a long time, and like I can see them losing all the support. But anyway, we talked about it. Ben agreed with what I was saying. He was like, they do need to wrap it up. They know that. I've said that to Netanyahu myself. He told me. So anyway, so on this tour, we'll have Tucker, we'll have Ben, we'll have you guys who I think are more pro-Israel or defensive of Israel. We'll have Emily Jashinsky. We'll have Glenn Greenwald, who are in the opposite camp.
Glenn's going to be on.
Glenn's going to be on. Yeah. So it's important to me to be able to, we have NRO, all the National Review guys, who are coming, and they'll take a much more bellicose stance, I think, on some of these issues. And then a Steve Bannon type, like he's MAGA, like on my show, it's important to me to be able to have all these people come and feel like their viewpoints will be respected and that they can express them fully. And then I trust.
Okay. But again, when you're peddling revisionist history, such as Winston Churchill was actually the chief villain of World War II, and Hitler's just this like horribly misunderstood villain who's actually not a villain, and it was the Zionists who lobbied Churchill to start the war and expand the war to a world war, and all of that was part of the evil Jews' plan to found the state of Israel in 1948. And the Holocaust actually was not a unique evil of World War II, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When you're peddling ideas that are falsehoods, that are revisionist history, and that sound like the talking points of authoritarian anti-Western regimes abroad, you should not have a legitimate platform to debate ideas that are false. And we do that with the left, right? We wouldn't have someone, for example, on Megyn Kelly's show, who is a staunch BLM supporter and claims that slavery is still a modern day issue. Why? Because that's a revisionist history, and we don't contend with that. We can't debate in the arena of ideas or political ideology something that's not true, that's not a reality. And so with that same expectation we hold the left to, we should also hold the right to. And I think that's what this boils down to, is an inability to look inward and call out the radical extremism. And unfortunately, we're at the inroad where the left was at when the left just went totally radical around 2014 started, and then especially it ramped up in 2020 with the race riots and with COVID. And that would have been the time for the left to go, you know what, I'm a classic Dem, and I believe in workers unions and maybe paying more taxes. There's more wealth to distribute, and I believe in universal health care, but identity politics at the intersection of gender and the color of your skin and your race, or this idea that there's actually no such thing as truth, capital T, and gender is fluid, and there's 800 and something genders, and if you could be a dog if you want to be a dog, like that's too radical. So at that point, if enough classical Democrats had alienated that radical ideology that might not be so prevalent on the left. Same thing for the right today. If we don't alienate the idea that the West is actually, the chief agitator and the source of evil around the world, like Tucker Carlson is peddling, or that the Jews are some sort of, cabal that orchestrate all global politics and the U.S. isn't sovereign, it's controlled by Israel, et cetera, then this anti-Jewish rhetoric, this idea that Israel is the temple of Satan, that the Jews are trying to convert Christians and they're trying to shoot up, churches, and the CIA and MK Ultra is actually some big operation that the Jews are using to attack Christians and manipulate the government. Like, when that becomes mainstream, as it is becoming mainstream, and when Nick Fuentes looks like the sound voice in the space, that's when the right is kind of veering into the very dangerous part of the radical left, where it's almost too far gone. Because once those ideas become mainstream, even if it's a lie, right? Just like modern slavery, or there is modern slavery, but there is not plantation slavery. And the civil rights movement happens. Institutional systemic racism does not exist in the way that DEI presents it. On the right, yeah, there's some powerful Jews, but this idea that the Jews run everything and somehow that's anti-Western, and this whole conspiracy right is now becoming mainstream, like DEI is to the left. And that is what is dangerous.
Trust my audience to make up their own minds. I am not in the business of then running around after you do me the courtesy of coming on my show and telling me your viewpoint of being like, he sucks, he's terrible, he's an anti-Semite or an Islamophobe or a racist, which I don't believe. Well,
I don't think Tucker's an Islamophobe. I think the problem is that he's become quite sympathetic with the Islamic world, as evidenced by his takes on Sharia law, or interviewing the president of Iran with the utmost of respect and talking points that the regime quite obviously gave Tucker Carlson. So it's not about, calling someone out and saying they suck. That's not what people are asking you to do. They're asking you to call out their ideas that suck. And the person and their ideas are two separate things. The left has conditioned us to think that they're one and the same, but they're not. And a true reporter, someone who's interested in the truth, even if you're going to present multiple viewpoints of that truth, it's oriented around at least truth, capital T, like we're talking about facts in real life, that's one thing. But if you're trying to legitimize fringe ideas or revisionist history or lies as a legitimate, alternative to policy in the real policy arena, I think that's where it gets dangerous.
I'm not going to do it. And now it's turned into like this faction that's trying to pressure me online. Feels to me like the BLM people. Raise your fist and say it. Say it.
It does have that dimension.
And the answer is no.
Yeah.
Now that you're making me say it, a condition of our relationship, it's a hard no.
And this is what I was talking about when it came to Charlie Kirk. And I actually think it's the inverse of what she thinks it is. This is reminiscent to her of BLM, like raise your fist or you're a racist. I don't think that's true, because that was the mainstream position. What people are actually asking Megyn to do is to call out the radical mainstream position that is very all or nothing, that is grievance based on the right. So I don't know if this is just her defensiveness and this is genuinely how she feels, if it's a cop out because she doesn't want to have to get caught in the infighting that's inevitably going to happen on the right. I think pretending like that's going to go away or that these people are going to legitimately debate and respect each other is wishful thinking. But I don't think this is like BLM where they're saying raise your fist. And her reaction is very similar to Charlie's, which is, okay, I'm going to double down. And actually, I'm going to have Tucker on my show 4 more times just to, give you the middle finger and stick it to you. I think that's counterproductive to combating radicalism that is groupthink, which is what Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens represent, which is the counter on the right to what BLM is on the left. So I actually think her point is the inverse of what's actually happening.
This is literally a conversation we had
You've
today.
only hardened my resolve to never do it.
Yeah.
Like I will never be bullied.
I think
ask anybody. I
think it's a very prideful. Because sure, there's internet trolls. There's internet trolls who, if you have millions and millions of followers who are going to ask you to say things that you might not agree with, it might call you names, whatever. Criticism is not new to Megyn Kelly. So I find it interesting that her and Charlie Kirk both took such great offense to this strand of criticism. And yes, there are radical Zionists who, if you criticize anything a Jewish person has done or anything about the state of Israel, then they might come out the anti-Semite. accusation. But for the most part, if you actually listen to what Tucker is saying, it's greatly anti-Semitic. He's peddling like age-old tropes, trying to rewrite theology that the Jews are not the chosen people, that, you know, we have more in common with Islam because they revere Jesus and the Jews rejected Jesus. Candace Owens is much more overt with it. But there's this almost pride, I think, that Megyn is demonstrating of, you're not going to tell me what to do, and I'm actually going to do the exact opposite. I think what most conservative Christians who support Israel are asking her to do is to call out the bad ideas before the right is just as radical as the left. And I think she would be the perfect voice for that. And I think doubling down on the stubborn position is, I mean, the Bible says pride comes before the fall. I'm not saying, or nor do I wish anything ill to come to Megyn Kelly or her platform. But I think, again, to whom much is given, much is expected. And when you have a voice that large, again, not to call out people or call them by name, call them an anti-Semite, but challenge their ideas. And I think that's what the majority of the criticism towards Megyn Kelly has been. And we're going to look at one of those tweets. And you can even see in her response to the tweet that we're going to look at this visceral response. And I would just caution her from being blinded by that response to what people are actually asking her to do.
The one thing that I will never bend the knee to. I'm not going to be bullied.
I mean, look, let me ask you a question about that, because we had saying we had lunch today and we were talking about this, in that is clearly your response on X and on your show, is that the more you push me, the more I'm going to say fuck you to you, which is a honest and natural response.
Irish, yeah.
An Irish response. Yeah. I don't want to impugn my people, but that's who we are. It's like, don't fucking make me say it because I'll fucking punch you. But that kind of response, like, if it wasn't that way, if there wasn't that big push, you just gave Andy McCarthy, like, you know, you said, I love the guy, but
that's the irony.
Here's where I think he's wrong.
Totally the irony.
So you can say that about people.
No,
you have said that about a lot of people. But when they say do it to Tucker or Candace, you pull back.
So Tucker is in a different camp because I adore Tucker. I
will say, and I've said this privately to people, because incidentally, people have said it to me and probably to us. We get a lot of emails like, you're on Megyn's show. You know, why aren't you saying X? Why are you still going on? That kind of thing. Yeah. So we get it as, you know, second tier people too. But
for yourself.
A third tier, actually. Sorry. I don't want to elevate you where you don't deserve to be. That's fine. But that kind of thing, I understand. And I knew Tucker back in the day. And, you know, I texted him about a year ago.
His libertarian days.
In his libertarian days. And he said in a text, like, I think we agree on a lot of things. I'm like, I don't think so these days. But I just
I think you probably do. You probably do.
Maybe on some things, but there's big things.
Right.
Huge things where I'm like, okay, you've gone to conspiracy world, and I hate conspiracy world. But when it comes to those things, when it comes to Candace and Tucker and stuff, is it only because people are pushing you on this? And because of people say the accusation of anti-Semitism, I will say forthrightly, full-throatedly, that is an absurd bullshit charge that doesn't stick to you in any way. Dennis Prager, I think he might be the prime minister of Israel. I'm not even sure at this point. There's no one that loves Israel more than Dennis Prager, who made a video saying the same thing. And I think that that's true. At the same time, when it comes to these people, you know what my position is. I was on your show saying, when you said things are taken out of context, you didn't tell me which ones. So I went back and watched.
I just said some of the things.
And I'm not saying that's not true. I don't know.
But it is true. It happens sometimes.
Well, because I said right after that, they'd been taking Charlie Kirk out of context. So I went back and I started watching, and it is actually crazier than I thought. I mean, the stuff these days is crazier than I thought. And so I guess the question is, like, what are the guardrails of who you want in the coalition? Who you say, like, oh, these are people, like, Candace is very popular.
That's not up to me.
I know it's not. But if you say, we're opinion mongers, that's what we do. We say, this is our opinion of X, Y, and Z. Are there people that are off limits for sort of friendly reasons, I guess, in the Tucker sense?
Well, listen, there's a reason I've never invited on Nick Fuentes.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, he's an interesting guy, from what I hear, but he's not my cup of tea.
He called Ben Shapiro today filth.
He filmed himself doing a little video game where he was shooting Jews wearing the yarmulke and said the one was Ben Shapiro.
Good God.
I don't really need to see an additional video to figure out who he is. I'm good. I got it.
Yeah.
See, and I think where Megyn and quite a few people who are more mainstream on the conservative right is they don't realize that Tucker and Candace are actually as extreme or have surpassed Nick Fuentes when it comes to the extremism in which they talk about Islam, the Jews, trying to connect a Jew to every corner of history where one didn't exist. It's like the 6th degree of Kevin Bacon. It's like for Candace and Tucker, it's like, well, what's the 6th degree of Jew? Like, can we connect the Revolutionary War and the Freemasons to then, World War I, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, World War II, Marxism in the Soviet Union, all of that was orchestrated by the Jews, and then the West won, but then somehow the West winning actually was an inversion of good, because we haven't been an agent or force for good in the world, because somehow also while fighting the Cold War, the Jews infiltrated the US government and the CIA, and you have MK Ultra, and then you had the assassination of JFK and AIPAC, and then we had 9/11, and it was actually the Jews, and then, you know, we went to war in the Middle East, and that wasn't good. And, you know, ignore the fact that Iran actually destabilized Afghanistan. That Iran destabilized Iraq internally after the invasion in 2003. Forget that fact. We're just going to demonize the West and America and the neocons, who are actually also Jews. Okay? That is what Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens represent on this side of the right. And that's everything that Nick Fuentes has been saying. So I think Megyn also doesn't realize how far gone Tucker and Candace are, because then she should hold Tucker and Candace to the same standard as not having Nick Fuentes on her show.
That was years ago, and whatever. Okay, I see he's having a resurgence. That's up to people if they want to listen to him.
By the way, still not a fan of the Jews. Just in that time, he was like, yeah.
Whereas I, on the other hand, have been very defensive of American Jews. Like I feel like they were bullied, they were harassed. That what's been happening to them on college campuses is a travesty. The ripping down of the hostage posters was absolutely disgusting. Now, I make a distinction there between them and Israel, who I have no obligation to defend. But my fellow Americans who are being subjected to blatant anti-Semitism, yes, every day of the week I've defended them and will continue to. I don't have to defend Israel, and I don't defend Israel. You know, I generally am on Israel's side. I'm certainly not on the side of Hamas, which is a terrorist organization and was absolutely vile and disgusting in that 10/7 attack, and I cried on the air after it happened. But that doesn't mean I don't get to criticize Israel. I think it's gone on too long. And as much as I see that Hamas is great at propaganda, they've been controlling the narrative, the Gaza Ministry of Peace, whatever they put out, those numbers are all lies, and a lot of these photos are lies, and they put out the sickest child that they've made sick. I know what Hamas does, trust me, and I've been covering it. But that doesn't mean that the devastation and destruction can go on forever. And Israel's now taken out Hezbollah. It's decimated Hamas. It had a war with Iran that we almost got dragged into, you know, in more full flower. It's time to wrap it up in this American's view. I am entitled to that opinion, and I will not be shamed out of it.
And no one's saying that you're not. And I think this is the narrative on the right for people who were like Charlie Kirk or Megyn Kelly, who are not the anti-Semitic extreme of Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. I think the fear is that in entertaining those as valid viewpoints or ideas, that's going to move mainstream, and failing to question those ideas, I think alarms a lot of conservative Americans. If you talk to an Israeli Jew in Israel, you're going to get, if you talk to 5 Jews, you're going to get 6 opinions on how the war should end and when it should have ended, and if it's a just war and if it's a genocide or whatever. The most critical people of Israel are Israelis. There's this idea peddled by Tucker and Candace and Nick Fuentes on the American right that if you criticize Israel, that's when they're going to say you're an anti-Semite. No, I'm saying you're an anti-Semite because you're peddling age-old anti-Semitic medieval tropes, such as the Jews drink Christians' blood or use it to make matzo balls. That's what I'm calling out. When Candace Owens sounds like a Catholic journalist during the Second Polish Republic, prior to the start of World War II, essentially denouncing Jews as having any place in Polish society, echoing a lot of what was happening in Germany, yeah, I have questions. When Tucker Carlson sounds like an official news pundit for Iran or Russia and is an apologist for them and saying that the US would lose a war with either of those nations, yeah, I'm gonna ask questions. So no, criticizing Israel's war, their war tactics, how long the war has gone on, that's not inherently anti-Semitic, and I don't think anyone is saying that it is. You can have legitimate criticism. That's Candace's whole point, right? When she was claiming that Israel killed Charlie Kirk because he was questioning Israel. It's like, well, no, he was questioning some of their policies. But again, if you go to Israel, every Israeli does. And I think that's the misnomer, is that, you know, if you breathe a small criticism for Netanyahu or for the war in Israel, then these crazy Zionists are going to call you an anti-Semite. And that's the furthest thing from the truth.
By being called an anti-Semite. Now, as for my decision to platform Tucker, too bad, too fucking bad. I love him. We're friends. I don't think he's an anti-Semite at all. I don't listen to all of Tucker's shows. I don't listen to all your shows. I don't have that many hours in the
broadcasting 17 hours a day.
Yeah, it's like, seriously. So like, I raise my kids.
Our shows are very anti-Semitic sometimes. I don't know.
Well,
we have weak moments.
Yeah, that's you too.
But I don't really care. I think Tucker's a very important, valuable voice in the national conversation. I'm thrilled.
Do you think Candace? I think Candace is apart from
I
Tucker.
don't know her. I don't really know her that well. Although I will tell you, we recently had a very nice exchange before all this, and I was just reminded in my own head that Candace is a young mom of like 3 young kids. She's under a lot of pressure. She's got a big show. She's been under attack since she came onto the public airwaves, and she's been under attack constantly. And it's my prerogative if I say to myself, that is not someone I wish to attack. I do not feel that way. I don't want to do it. Yeah. And I felt this way. And now that people have made my attacking her the stakes of my relationship with whatever person is saying this, I'm going to have to say goodbye to that person. I won't.
Okay, we get it. You won't do it, Megyn. This is the other thing, and I raised this point actually in the comment section that was posted to Instagram with this thread, is her reasons for not speaking out against Candace Owens, which if you just like listen to 2 seconds or a compilation of her talking, it's very clear that she is off her hinges, like psychotically obsessed with trying to pin everything on the Jews. Even the Macron thing, she circled back to pedophilia, which is of course also the Jews. This idea, and I would push back against Megyn respectfully, that because she's a young mom and she's had criticism since she came on the scene, and that's why she's not going to add to it, it's criticism for her ideas and her delivery. And I don't know, I find it absolutely disgusting that she tried to, or she did, monetize Charlie Kirk's death with shows that had in-show ads. She got millions and millions of views, so she got a lot of money also for the conspiracy theories that she both orchestrated, created, and then also appointed herself as the only detective who could tell you the truth of what happened to Charlie Kirk. I think that's pretty deplorable. And there's other women in the media, such as Meghan Markle, that Megyn Kelly has viciously and humorously gone after for being a ridiculous narcissist who constantly contradicts herself, who uses her platform to make money. She's also a young mom of children. She's a young Black mom as well. And that hasn't stopped Megyn Kelly from calling out the hypocrisy of Meghan Markle. So, again, it's hold that standard consistently across the left and the right. And I think it's a lot braver actually to call out people who are in quote unquote your own camp than it is to call out people on the left. That's expected. That's partisan politics. Okay. So that was that video. Megyn and Charlie essentially echoed the same thing. And I'll just look at this for a second. But you can see in this clip that they both have that, don't tell me what I'm going to do. And if you do, I'm going to both cut off my relationship with you. And then I'm also going to double down on having these radical people come onto my platform. And I think that, like I said, is the very prideful stance to take.
You and I are both supporters of Israel. And
and no one's questioning that as well, because she also said that in the last clip we just saw where it's, well, I'm a supporter of Israel. Okay. That's like when BLM happened. And it's like, well, I have Black friends. I just don't support BLM. No one is attacking Megyn or Charlie for not being pro-Israel. Actually, that narrative has come from the woke right that claims the reason Charlie Kirk was killed was because he was questioning Israel. That's not something I've heard a lot from people on the right. And we're going to look at one of the X exchanges after this that essentially emphasizes Megyn's kind of visceral response and the very, very leveled criticism that Konstantin Kisin gave her.
Defended Israel since the beginning of this conflict and spoken out about the anti-Semitism that has erupted on these college campuses many, 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 many times. And something's happening, though, with this whole debate that is really bothering me. And I wonder if you're feeling it, too. So, I mean, I genuinely believe you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody in the public eye who's been as outspoken a defender of not every move Israel's taken in the war, but of Israel's right to defend itself and of the just backward awfulness that we've been seeing on college campuses and the backlash against American Jews than yours truly. I mean, I have been at the pointy end of the spear on this. And I
completely agree with that.
And it was all heartfelt and it remains heartfelt.
Yes.
However, my contention here is that some in the pro-Israel camp are so knee-jerk about calling you anti-Semitic or getting deeply offended if you say anything that doesn't align with their narrative, that it undermines their own cause. And I have to tell you, I find it very irritating because I do feel like some of us have earned the right to have some credibility on the subject of Israel and don't want to be called those names
when we have some mild pushback on some of the overreaches, whether it's, whether they're winning or losing the propaganda war right now. And my contention is they've begun to lose it. And
I just met with Netanyahu in New York, and I've told Netanyahu this. He goes, yeah, we are. Israel's not offended even by that. Israel knows they're losing the propaganda war. That's one front that Israel has always lost on. And as technology and Instagram has become more and more prevalent, it's more and more evident. Why? Because you have the far left and now the far right who converge on an anti-Israel bias. You have the Islamic world and the influence of Islamism abroad and in the West that contributes to that. And then you also have a bunch of bot farms in Pakistan that fuel and push anti-Israel comments under all of these videos. So of course, Israel knows that they're losing the propaganda war. That's not news to anyone who supports Israel or to Israelis or to the Prime Minister of Israel himself.
Realize it's propaganda coming at us from Hamas, but their numbers have turned here in America. They've turned not so much with Republicans, a little bit with Republicans, but completely with the Democrat Party and with independents. They have shifted mightily from at least double digits highs to single digit lows now with when it comes to approval.
But the reason for that, the left was already anti-Israel, right? But for the centrists or for people on the right who are now not supporting Israel, it's the same reasons. Oh, it's because AIPAC controls America. Oh, Israel controls the United States, and we're giving all of our money to Israel. The Jews control everything. Oh, the Jews in Hollywood, the Jews in DC, and who's peddling that? Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. So when there's a correlation between dissent on Israel on the center to right, where there has not historically been, you have to step back and ask why. And it's probably not because Israel is enacting a just war. And a lot of what appeals to those on the right to be anti-Israel is not what's appealing to people on the left. It's not necessarily the genocide claim. It's more so Israel kills Christians, Israelis spit on Christians, AIPAC controls us. And who's peddling that? Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens. And that is why people were upset with Megyn and Charlie, was because they were unwilling to call out those ideas. Even if you don't want to call the person anti-Semitic, great, that's a friend. That's understandable. But yeah.
And also with respect to, you and I speculated about this at the Turning Point event, whether the possibility of Jeffrey Epstein possibly being a Mossad agent or asset or affiliated with, that's been turned around on me too, to you must be anti-Semitic. What the hell? That's such bullshit. The same people who say you can criticize Israel, that's fine. We won't call you anti-Semitic if you criticize Israel. Now, turn around immediately and say you're anti-Semitic for even raising that. I completely reject that. And I raise this as a pushback against my friends on that particular strain of the aisle to watch it, because you don't want to alienate people who are openly your friends by going nuts in your crackdowns on mild pushback on anything related to Israel. Now you take it.
Okay, it's not mild pushback. Okay. The Epstein file's great. Was he probably connected to Mossad? Yeah. Okay. And people like Megyn or like Charlie or like me or probably like you watching this video could isolate the Epstein files from all of the Jews and the Jews throughout all of history and the threat of the Jews to the West. A lot of people center to the extreme right in America can't separate that. The Epstein files is just one more example, or it's just that much more evidence on how the Jews control our country. And that's where I think a lot of people get triggered. Is it strategic for those on the right who support Israel to alienate Megyn Kelly? No. Do I think she's being a little bit sensitive and prideful when it comes to it because you can't see the bigger picture of what people are worried about? I also think yes. So really quickly before ending this episode, we are going to look at the text thread that Candace made sure we all saw. So this is a group chat shared by Candace Owens. Charlie Kirk said, just lost another huge Jewish donor, $2 million a year because we won't cancel Tucker. I'm thinking of inviting Candace. And I think this is where, and of course, Candace, the narcissist, goes, he was, threatening to bring me back. I don't think that's why he was threatening to invite Candace. It was because he was trying to piss off the Jewish donors or people telling him what he could or could not say. Charlie said, Jewish donors play into all the stereotypes. I cannot and will not be bullied like this, leaving me no choice but to leave the pro-Israel cause. Listen, I respect Charlie Kirk. Absolutely gutted by his assassination. I think it is going to be the biggest turning point, both in very good and positive ways, and also, unfortunately, in ways that I think is going to create a power vacuum for people like Nick Fuentes to become more mainstream. But I will say I think Charlie Kirk could have been stronger on rebuking the radical ideas of people like Tucker Carlson rather than legitimizing them and then being outraged when people were like, whoa, 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 whoa. Because think about it. Tucker and Candace sounds a lot like Nazi sympathizers in the interwar years. And I know there's a knee-jerk reaction when anyone says, oh, you're a Nazi. Why? Because the left has called any mainstream MAGA Republican a Nazi for a decade. And so now people go, oh, you're just name-calling. Anti-Semite's the new Nazi. No. When you listen to Candace or Tucker speak, I mean, and I'm going to do a whole episode on this because I have a huge anthology over here, actually, of the Jews in Poland and Russia from 1914 to 2008. There's 3 volumes of this. And so there's just a ton of content from newspapers and what political leaders at the time were saying in the interwar years. And what Candace and Tucker sound like are Nazi apologists. So my question to the Charlie Kirks or to the Megyn Kellys is, okay, so let's just say that we were back in the interwar years before World War II happened. My favorite professor used to always ask this question: when would have been the right time to stop the Nazis? When can we pinpoint a time in history to stop them? And the answer is that once they gained power, once the Nuremberg laws were passed in 1935, it's too late, right? The time would have been for a counter narrative or a counter political revolution in Germany to have challenged the ideas of the Nazi Party before they became mainstream and were elected into office. Because again, at that point, it's too late. It's a beast that's already in power. So my question to Charlie and Megyn would be, okay, so if we were back in interwar Germany, would it have then been legitimate to invite, a Nazi apologist or Hitler to come speak at a TPUSA summit just so that his ideas had the same fair chance in the public arena? I think no. And that might sound like an uncomfortable question, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, especially with Charlie Kirk's passing. I greatly revere both of these people, but I also greatly push back against the idea that all ideas are legitimate, especially if they're radical or they're based on lies or they sympathize with our greatest enemies abroad. And I think challenging Megyn and Charlie to denounce those ideas, not the people, is not a radical ask of mainstream, very popular conservative voices in the space. And I think this text strand and Megyn, kind of echoing the same sentiment of don't tell me what to do. I'm going to do the exact opposite. You see this here in this text. Okay, people are pushing back against Tucker. They're trying to censor me. Great. I'm going to abandon the pro-Israel movement. I'm going to invite Candace on just to give them a middle finger. I think that's a more short-sighted approach to the larger ideological war that is happening. All right. Lastly, we're just going to look at some of these texts or some of these X threads. So someone said, if you can't separate yourself from Candace Owens, many of us are going to separate ourselves from you. We do not have to align with everyone that claims to be of the right, etc., etc. Okay. According to Florida Dad. And Megyn said, look at this. No, I have no obligation to separate myself from anyone. I run my own media company and my own show. That show is where I express my own opinions, and I will decide what not to opine on. If you need me to condemn Candace or Tucker of their opinions in order to listen to me, then I may not be for you. He's a close friend, and she is under enough pressure without gratuitous shots from me. My fight is with the left, not these two. Okay. She essentially said all this on the podcast that we just took a look at. Okay. So she has this kind of like knee-jerk reaction. You're not going to tell me what to do. I'm going to do the exact opposite as a middle finger to you. And let's see. All right. So then Constantine, who's the host of a wonderful podcast called Trigonometry. I believe he comes from a Russian family. So he has seen what radicalism looks like from a political perspective, responded to this thread and said, the problem with this approach, which many on the right are taking, And I think this represents the more common criticism of Megyn, not the fringe people saying, you know, denounce and rebuke these people or you're an anti-Semite. I think that's a very extreme, selective representation of what the majority of people on the right are asking Megyn to do, which is to clarify what is right and wrong and what are the boundaries of acceptable political debate and what is just propaganda and lies. And Constantine points this out. So the problem with this approach, which many on the right are taking, is that this is exactly how the left allowed its own extremists to first flourish and then become the face of the entire movement 100%. And this is why I do this podcast. I speak out against this all the time, because I see the Nick Fuentes crowd becoming the next generation of Republicans. If you agree with Candace and Tucker, people will respect that. But to many of us, their behavior is so extreme and so deranged that the idea that it can be simply ignored because, quote, your fight is with the left doesn't wash. You have always been a great principled, truth-seeking journalist. So to many of your admirers like me, the question might be, if you agree with them, fine. But if you don't, why isn't your fight with them? And I thought this was an extremely powerful response to Megyn. Notice that he's just challenging, like I've said here in this podcast, okay, great. You are a very leveled and principled journalist. Megyn has always been that. So why can't you question the radicalism on your own side? Because again, it's the beast that's forming that's going to look just like the extremism on the left. And a lot of people, whether they're uncomfortable or whether or not they don't want to wake some beast or whatever it is, are refusing and doubling down to address it. And again, I think it's such a short-sighted tactic and strategy. So Megyn responds to Constantine. And says, the more one insists that I say what one demands me to, the more committed I get in my refusal. And again, she's not addressing the merits of his response. And I thought his response, it was not a personal attack. It wasn't a refusal to watch her or interact with her if she didn't denounce Tucker or Candace. And it's an emotional response on the part of Megyn. Okay? And then Constantine responded, and I thought, you know, yet again, what a great response. He said, I demand nothing of you, and I'm coming from a position of great respect. And I thought his first response was also very respectful. I am simply asking why it is that you don't believe that lies told by prominent people on the right shouldn't be challenged in the way we all challenge lies told by people on the left. And I thought that this was, again, very leveled, very respectful, and is also my, challenge to Megyn Kelly is, well, why won't you call out? If you stand for truth, then lies colored by the left or the right are lies, and then are therefore, valid issues or positions to challenge and go after. And for someone like Megyn, who's so fiery and has such a staunch response to truth, to challenging the deranged and illogical left, I just am, questioning and hopeful that then she'll see that growing radicalism is on the right as well. And she even talked about Nick Fuentes, and maybe she's just not aware of how radical Nick Fuentes is. She says she hasn't heard everything Tucker has said. I think if you're also platforming people on tour with you, you should be at least aware of some of the things that they have said. I'm hoping to go to her show that's coming to my city. And if there's a Q&A section, I might just print out some things that Tucker has said and ask her if she agrees with the sentiment of his ideas. Forget about denouncing him as a person. And again, I think we should be able to separate those two things. The only problem is I think sometimes when someone like Tucker refuses to confront the merit or the lack of merit of his ideas, or the lack of facts that back up his position, I think then calls into question, okay, so is Tucker a liar? Is there a lack of moral clarity here? Who's paying him? Is he being bought off? And then you do start to question someone's character. So in some ways, when you're calling out their ideas, you are calling out their motives, which then might mean looking at their character at large, which is something Megyn might not want to do if he's a friend. All right, with that, I'm going to end today's episode. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the Fearless Project channel, and I'll see you in the next one.